students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be learning about the point-slope formula, and you will be able to do page 2. Today, students will be able to write an equation given the slope and a point with y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. This is called the point-slope formula because you're using 1 point for this information and then you're using the slope. Before we continue from the previous lesson, if you remember, the slope is represented by the letter m. It's always the coefficient of x in y equals mx plus b. Let me write it down. Y equals mx plus b. So it's always the coefficient of x. It's found by subtracting the y values of 2 points over the subtraction of the x values of that same point. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. This is also known as the change on y over the change on x because we always put how many spaces of difference in the values of y on the numerator and the difference of the values of x in the denominator. Same thing as rise over run, or the little son over the person racing, okay, because you're running. And if you recall, the y-intercept is the initial point, and that's when x is 0. This is not going to be pertaining today, but we will find it. Okay, so we want to find the equation in y equals mx plus b. However, to get to that point, we have to find the point-slope formula. This is my point, the point that they're giving me, and this is the slope. They're also giving that to me. Remember, it's y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. When it has a little 1 in here, that means that we're going to replace it by the value of x. So this is x1, and this is y1. So we're going to be replacing those values in the proper space. And for the slope, we're going to replace it in here. So we have y minus the value of y. Minus is just from the formula, okay? So we put minus 1 equals the slope, which is negative 1/3. We open a parenthesis because that's the form of the formula. We put x minus x1 would be minus 6. The next step is to do distributive property. Anytime you have a multiplication of a value outside and then parentheses, you're going to use distributive property if there is no sign in here. So negative times positive is going to be negative. 1/3 times x is just 1/3 x. For the next value is negative times negative becomes positive. Whenever you have a fraction and a whole number and you're multiplying, I just say multiply directly. Multiply by the numerator and divide by the denominator. So 6 times 1, 6 divided by 3. And I could even just ignore that part and go directly. Multiply and divide. Multiply and divide. So 6 times, we already multiplied, negative times negative is positive. Now just worry about the numbers. 6 times 1, 6. Divided by 3, 2. Okay? Directly. Multiply and divide by this one. In here, we just bring down the y minus 1. The next step to leave it in y equals mx plus b is cancel this one. Y has to be isolated before the equal sign. So if we're subtracting 1, the opposite is to add 1. This cancels and you get y equals the slope. If you notice, the slope stays the same throughout. So negative 1/3 x. 2 plus 1 is 3. And so yeah, now you have y equals mx plus b. So this is my slope and this is my initial point. Again, we have to write it in y equals mx plus b. But to get to that point, we need y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. we're going to replace these two, these two by those values and m by this value. So y minus, now be careful because you have minus from the formula and then y1 is -5, so you have double negative in there. Some people prefer to have the parentheses. It's up to you if you want to put it or not with me, but some professors or teachers do ask that you put a parentheses, okay, to separate the signs. So it's the m is -1, and then you put x minus from the formula 9 for x1. When we have the negative and negative together, it makes the big plus, okay? I make it big, 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 big so that you can notice that the 5 is now positive, it's not negative. So we do distributive property, and we have -1 times x is -1x, but we don't need to write the 1 as coefficient, okay? We know that there is a 1 in there, a -1, but we don't write it. Negative times negative is positive. 1 times 9 is 9. We bring this down, but now it's y. Because negative and negative becomes the big plus, we just put +5. Now to isolate the y, we get rid of the +5 by subtracting 5. And this cancels, so we get y equals -x, +9, and -5 is +4. Remember, different signs we subtract and leave the greater sign. So it's going to be +4. Again, 4 is my initial point or y-intercept, and the slope is -1. Okay, the -1 never changed. Oh, and I'm not allowing you to see. So this is the initial point, and the -1 is the slope. Okay, I'm going to go a little faster since you already know the routine. Y equals mx plus b. But we start with y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Y minus, and then again the y, so this is x1, y1, has a negative. So negative and -3. The slope is 4. Bring down the x, minus 2. Negative, negative makes the big plus, only if they're next to each other, okay? So y plus 3. We do distributive property on the other side. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times -2 is -8. And the last step, if we're adding, we need to subtract. Subtract. However, are we going to subtract? Well, if they're the same sign, we add and keep the greater sign. So keep the 4x, but in here instead we're going to add because we have the same sign. Same sign, add. Different sign, subtract, and leave the greater sign. Okay, in this case, because they're the same sign, we are going to add a plus 3 is 11, and keep the greater sign is the negative from the 8. Okay. I'm mentioning about the graph. I just want you to see the relationship. If this is my initial point, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 on y. Remember that this is my initial point, always on y. And then for the slope is rise over run. Because it's positive, it's going to go up. It's the sun, okay? The sun is positive, it goes up. The runner is positive, it goes to the right. So 4 spaces up and 1 to the right. 4 spaces up and 1 to the right. And so on. And that will be my graph if you were asked to graph. Again, this is my initial point, y, y, x. Okay? You don't have to do this part, but if you want to practice, that's perfectly fine. And that way you see the relationship between the slope, which is the movements on y, and the movements on x. That's my slope. And then this is going to be my initial point. In here, we were not given the initial point as in the previous lesson, but we were able to find it by using the point slope formula. I wonder if you noticed something within this equation. I'm not going to say anything, but it's related to this one. Let's do the same process that we were doing anyways. So y equals mx plus b. Again, we're going to use the formula y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. This is x1, y1 to replace here, and this is the slope to replace here. So y minus y1 is 2. The slope is 7. Remember that m represents the slope. X minus 0. And so we're going to use distributive property. But bring this down at the same time. Y minus 2 equals 7 times x, 7x. 7 times 0 is 0. You don't need to put minus in here. Positive times negative, negative. And then 7 times 0, 0. Again, it doesn't matter. I would disappear right there. If I'm subtracting 2, the opposite is to add 2. These cancel, and y equals 7x, negative 0, positive 2, then you have 2. What did I want you to notice? Remember that in the previous video we said that your initial point or y-intercept is always when x equals 0. Since this is 0, notice how your initial point is just that. So we could have just written like the previous lesson, y equals the slope with x, and the initial point, we would know that that's the initial point because the initial point or y-intercept is always next to x equals 0. Again, we don't have to graph in here, but just so you see the relationship, the initial point, which is this one right here, is 0, 2. Then the slope is rise is 7. So from that point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then since we don't have a run, we put it over 1. So 7 up and 1 to the right. 7 up and 1 to the right. 7 up and 1 to the right. And you only need 2 points. But that will be my graph for that. What is my initial point? This is my initial point. What is the slope? The change on y and change on x. Change on y over change on x. Okay? Which is positive 7, positive 1. Now doing those graphs will help me understand how to figure this one out. Now in here we have 2 points. We don't have the slope. So what we will want to do the same procedure that we just did is the first thing is find or choose one of the 2 points. Some people prefer to work only with positives, so let's choose 6, 4. For the slope, we have to find how many spaces on y over the spaces on x. And so for y, it's going up, so it's positive 1, 2, 3. For x is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But that can be simplified because both numbers are divisible by 3. And 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So it's 1/3. That means that if I go up 1 and then 3 spaces to the right, I'm going to find 3 spaces to the right. I'm going to find points where we don't have fractions. So in here is 1 point, in here is 1 point, and then that one. Up 1, 3 to the right. Again, how do we do this? choose one of the 2 points. For the slope, count from the left, the point that is farther to the left. Count how many spaces you go up or down and put that value here. Then how many spaces to the right and put that value here. And simplify if possible. That's your slope, okay? Now we're able to find y equals mx plus b. Let me write it in here, y equals mx plus b. But we have to use the point slope formula. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. This is x1 and y1. And the slope, we're going to use the simplified form to make our lives easier. So y minus the value of y1 is 4. The slope, we're going to use the simplified form, which is 1/3. X minus 6. We're going to use distributive property, but bring this down. Y minus 4 equals 1/3 times x is 1/3 x. In here, positive times negative is negative. I always multiply the signs first so I don't get confused, and that way I don't have to worry about the signs later. I just worry about the numbers now. And remember, when you have a fraction and a whole number, just multiply the whole number with the numerator and divide by the denominator. So in here, we multiply and divide. 6 times 1, 6. Divided by 3. Well, 6 divided by 3 is 2. The last step is to leave y by itself. So if I'm subtracting 4, the opposite is to add 4. And so y equals 1/3 x. Remember that adding doesn't mean adding all the time. If we have different signs, we subtract and leave the greater sign. So 4 minus 2 is 2. And the greater sign is positive. We do need to put that positive in there. Okay, so it's y equals 1/3 x plus 2. Now let me show you how I can find that in this graph that they gave us. So the initial point is the positive 2, which is always on y. It's right there. That's my initial point. And then from that point, you go 1 up and 3 to the right. So 1 up and 3 spaces to the right is right there, okay? And you just connect that line. That's why I want you to see all these connections, that this is the y-intercept, that this is the slope, that you find this as the y-intercept on the graph, and the slope is the spaces that you move. And those are the connections that we need to understand. Oh, one more thing, my line is positive, my slope is positive, so now let's look at the next graph. Notice how this time the line is negative. So what's going to happen with the slope? The slope is going to be negative. Okay, so choose one of the points, any of the 2. So in here we have, let's do -3. Both of them have a negative, so -3, +4. And for the slope, we are going to count how many spaces we move on y. Always start on the point on the left, okay, the farther to the left. So start here. To get to this, I said, oh, you're going to go visit your neighbor. Oh, how many blocks do you need to move to get to her? Oh, or him. I went an extra, so don't count all the way down there. It's only up to this point, okay? Forget about that one. So we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the slope is going to be 8, but because we went down, it's going to be -8. And on y, the change is 1, 2, 3, 4, because you're going to the right is positive, 4. Now we simplify it. Negative divided by positive is negative, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. Okay, so this is my simplified slope, -2. That's what we're going to use. Again, we want to get to y equals mx plus b. To write it in slope intercept to write it in slope intercept form. But we need to use the y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. If you notice, it's y minus y1, x minus x1, but you just have the slope next to the x because the slope is always the coefficient of x. Now we start replacing. This is my x1 and y1. Y minus y1 is 4. The slope, we're going to use the simplified one, -2. X minus, now x is negative, so -3. Negative from the formula and negative from x. And two negatives together make the big plus. So big that the 3 is not negative anymore, it's positive. Bring down this y minus 4. We use distributive property. -2 times x is -2x. Negative times positive is negative, and 2 times 3 is 6. Finally, if I'm subtracting 4, I need to add 4. Remember that we need to leave y by itself. -4 and +4 cancel each other. We only have y equals -2x. Remember that when we have negative and positive, meaning different signs, we subtract. 6 minus 4 is 2, and leave the greater sign. The greater sign is from the 6, which is negative. Okay, so the equation is y equals -2x minus 2. Now let's compare it to our graph. This is my initial point, so it should be at -2 on y, so -1, -2 is right there. They didn't give it to us this time, like in last lesson, but we can see it now. And the rise and run, this is the sun. It's negative. Remember I told you that the slope was going to be negative? -1, positive. So negative, from that point, -2 is 1, 2, and then +1 to the right. Those 2 points you would, if you were given this, those are the 2 points that you would find on the graph, okay? And with this, we end our lesson. If you can please give us a thumbs up, subscribe around here. This is the link to the entire unit, and here you will find the next lesson. Now you're able to do page 2 and have fun.